3 hired guns cornered the Apache Huntress. The rancher stepped in. "She's with me." The planet of Red Hollow was known for its dry, dusty terrain and harsh winds that swept across its red, rocky hills. It was a place where only the toughest survived. The sun was setting on this unforgiving world, casting long shadows over the land. The air was heavy with the scent of dry grass and the distant sound of howling winds. As the day turned to night, the sky above painted itself in shades of orange and purple, a striking contrast to the deadly scene unfolding below. 3 hired guns, each carrying a reputation for ruthlessness, had cornered a lone woman. They had been tracking her for days, and now they had her surrounded. The woman was known as the Apache Huntress, a name whispered in fear across the outer colonies. She was a survivor, a warrior, and a tracker like no other. Her presence on Red Hollow was no accident. She had come here to escape the hunters that pursued her, but now, in the rocky hills near Red Hollow, it seemed she had nowhere left to run. The 3 men closed in slowly, each one confident that they had the upper hand. They had been hired to capture or kill the Huntress, and they were not about to let her escape. The first man, a large, burly figure named Corbin, sneered as he moved forward. His hands gripped the handles of his weapon, a futuristic rifle that could pierce through the toughest of armors. He had been hunting for years, and this woman, this so-called Huntress, was just another prey to him. The second man, a wiry and quick figure named Arlo, was already circling the Huntress from the left, his eyes darting to every corner, searching for any movement. His specialty was speed, and he was known to be able to outmaneuver most people in a fight. Arlo didn't need brute strength. He relied on his quick reflexes to take down his targets. The third man, a quiet and cold-blooded killer named Jax, stood behind the others, his hand resting on the grip of a sleek plasma pistol. Unlike the other 2, Jax was patient. He didn't rush in for a quick kill. No, he waited for the perfect moment, letting the others do the work while he planned his next move. He had seen too many people underestimate him, and it was always their mistake. The Apache Huntress crouched low behind a boulder, her breathing steady and controlled. She knew these men were dangerous, but she was no stranger to danger herself. Her eyes scanned the terrain, searching for any way out. Her fingers brushed against the handle of a small throwing knife she kept hidden in her boot. She didn't want to fight unless she had to. She had learned long ago that sometimes the best way to survive was to wait, but these men weren't making it easy. They were closing in, and soon they would force her hand. Corbin moved closer, his voice low and mocking. "You've got nowhere to go, Huntress. Surrender now, and we'll make it quick." "Resist, and it'll be much worse for you." The Huntress remained silent, her eyes never leaving his. She had no intention of surrendering, but she knew she had to think fast. The wind shifted, carrying with it the faintest sound, the sound of a ship approaching. It was distant, but it was enough to give her hope. Someone else was out there. But whether they were friend or foe, she didn't know. Just then she heard a voice, a deep, steady voice that cut through the tension like a knife. "She's with me." The 3 hired guns froze. They turned toward the voice, confusion and suspicion clouding their faces. Standing in the distance, silhouetted against the setting sun, was a lone figure. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a rugged look about him. His hat was pulled low over his face, and his stance was confident but relaxed. He didn't look like much of a threat, not compared to the 3 experienced bounty hunters, but there was something about the way he stood that made the men pause. "Who the hell are you?" Corbin growled, stepping forward, his rifle raised. The man didn't flinch. His voice was calm, almost casual. "I'm the one who says she's with me. Now, if you don't mind, I'd like you to back off." The hired guns laughed, but the laughter was nervous. They didn't know who this man was, but his presence was enough to make them rethink their plan. Arlo glanced at Corbin, uncertainty flickering in his eyes. They had been hired for a job, but it was clear this man wasn't afraid of them. That alone was enough to make them cautious. Jax, however, remained quiet, his eyes narrowing. He was the strategist, the patient one. He had learned long ago that appearances could be deceiving. This rancher, if that's what he was, could be dangerous in ways they hadn't anticipated. He wouldn't make a move yet, but he was watching closely. Corbin was the first to speak again, his voice cold and threatening. "You're making a mistake, friend. You've got no business here. Stay out of this, and we'll let you walk away." The man's hand rested on the grip of his revolver, but he didn't draw it. Instead, he took a step forward, his boots crunching against the rocky ground. "I don't think you understand. This woman is under my protection now. You're not going to hurt her." There was a long pause, the wind howling across the desert as the 3 hired guns processed the situation. The Huntress, still hidden behind the boulder, watched the scene unfold. She had no idea who this man was, but she couldn't help but feel a small spark of gratitude. Whoever he was, he had just made the situation a lot more complicated for her enemies. Corbin's hand tightened around his rifle. "You're about to learn what happens when you stand in our way." The rancher, however, wasn't intimidated. His voice remained steady. "I'm giving you one chance to walk away. Take it." The tension in the air grew thick, like the calm before a storm. The hired guns were hesitant, unsure whether they should take the rancher's threat seriously. But before they could make a decision, the sound of a ship's engines roared in the distance, growing louder by the second. The Huntress, sensing the opportunity, moved. She darted out from behind the boulder, her body a blur of movement. Her hand reached for her bow as she aimed an arrow directly at Corbin. In that moment, everything changed. The battle for survival had begun. The tension in the air was thick, a moment suspended in time. The sound of the approaching ship grew louder, and the 3 hired guns were still trying to figure out what to do. But the Apache Huntress was quick, her movements sharp and calculated. She didn't need to waste time. Corbin, the leader of the bounty hunters, was still standing in her line of sight. With a swift motion, the Huntress pulled her bowstring tight. The arrow flew through the air with deadly precision, straight at Corbin. The man barely had time to react before the arrow lodged into his shoulder, sending him stumbling back with a shout of pain. The 2 remaining men, Arlo and Jax, snapped into action immediately. Arlo's fingers twitched towards his weapon, and Jax's eyes locked onto the Huntress. But before either could react, the rancher moved, his hand drawing the revolver with an almost practiced ease. The shot rang out. Arlo's gunshot missed, narrowly skimming past the rancher. The man remained calm as he aimed and fired once more. This time, the bullet hit Arlo square in the chest. Arlo crumpled to the ground, unable to even scream in pain. Jax, the last of the hired guns, pulled out his plasma pistol, ready to make a move. His focus was now entirely on the rancher, who had fired twice with deadly accuracy. The Huntress had already begun moving towards the fallen men, but Jax wasn't about to let her get the upper hand. The rancher was still standing, but he knew this wasn't over. He quickly pulled his revolver back into its holster, stepping forward with a sense of determination. His eyes never left Jax as he slowly approached the body of Arlo, keeping himself between the Huntress and the last gunman. The wind howled again, a stark contrast to the eerie silence of the standoff. Jax, who had been quiet up until now, made a sound, a low growl that seemed to come from deep within his chest. He wasn't a man who enjoyed being played with, and now he was enraged. "You think you can just come in and stop this rancher?" Jax spat, his hand gripping the plasma gun tightly. "You don't know who you're messing with." The rancher didn't flinch. His voice remained steady, almost calm. "You've got 2 choices, Jax. You can walk away, or we can keep this going." Jax laughed bitterly, stepping forward, but then he stopped. There was a sudden, subtle shift in the air, and the wind carried a new sound, the distant hum of engines, growing louder and faster. The rancher glanced over his shoulder, his instincts telling him that there was someone else coming. The Huntress noticed the same thing. Her sharp eyes cut through the scene, searching the horizon. She didn't know who was coming, but if they were friends, they might just tip the scales in their favor. She took a deep breath, preparing herself for whatever was next, but for now her focus was on the last remaining hunter. Jax's face twisted with a mixture of frustration and fury. "This isn't over," he snarled. He fired his plasma pistol, the blast lighting up the darkness. The shot narrowly missed the rancher, and Jax cursed under his breath. But before he could fire again, the sound of engines grew louder. Suddenly a ship appeared in the sky above, cutting through the orange twilight. It was a sleek black craft, and as it descended toward the battlefield, Jax's eyes widened in recognition. The ship landed with a low hum just beyond the rocky hills. The doors hissed open, and out stepped 2 figures. One was a tall woman with long dark hair, her movements swift and graceful, like a shadow in the night. The other was a man with short-cropped hair, his face stern, but his eyes scanning the battlefield with sharp intelligence. They moved with purpose, heading straight for the fight. Jax's gun faltered in his hand. The reinforcements had arrived, and they weren't just anyone. They were from the same tribe as the Apache Huntress. She had called in backup, and now things had shifted completely. The rancher looked at the Huntress, a silent understanding passing between them. He could see the faintest hint of a smile on her face. She had known this was coming. "You didn't tell me you had friends in high places," the rancher said, a note of amusement in his voice. The Huntress gave a small, knowing nod. "You didn't ask." With a renewed sense of purpose, the 2 new arrivals advanced. the woman moving swiftly toward Jax, while the man took up a position at the rancher's side. The woman's eyes locked onto Jax, her voice cold and steady. "Put down your weapon. This fight is over." Jax hesitated, his eyes flickering from the woman to the man. His face was full of anger, but there was something else now. Uncertainty. The reinforcements were more than capable, and he knew that if this continued, there would be no way out. "You don't want to do this?" the man beside the rancher said, his voice calm but firm. "Walk away. No one needs to die today." Jax didn't lower his weapon, but his hand wavered. The sudden arrival of the Apache reinforcements had caught him off guard. He wasn't prepared for this kind of interference, and it made him nervous. The balance of power had shifted, and he knew it. The woman who had stepped out of the ship moved closer to him, her eyes burning with a quiet intensity. "This is your last chance," she said. "You either walk away, or you face the consequences." He was torn. Part of him wanted to fight, wanted to finish the job, but another part of him knew he was outmatched. And in this unforgiving land, survival came first. Finally, Jax lowered his weapon. "This isn't over," he muttered, his voice full of venom. "You'll regret this." But he turned and ran. The last of the hired guns knew when to cut his losses. The Huntress stood still, watching him disappear into the distance. She could have pursued him, but she didn't need to. The fight was over. The rancher turned to face her, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "Is it always this exciting around here?" The Huntress's smile was small but genuine. "You get used to it." The woman nodded to the Huntress, a sign of respect. The man gave the rancher a brief, appraising glance, but said nothing. "You've got a good eye, rancher," the woman said. "Not many people would have stepped in like you did." The rancher tipped his hat, his expression serious. "I don't like seeing anyone get bullied. And this woman, well, she's got a lot of fight left in her." That's one way to put it. As the group gathered together, the dark sky above began to fill with stars. The fight was over for now, but the winds of Red Hollow still howled, carrying with them the promise of more danger. They all knew it was just a matter of time before something else would come to challenge them. But for now, they could rest. And for the rancher, there was still much to learn about the woman he had just saved, and the world he had found himself part of. The calm after the storm felt strange, almost unnatural. The wind, which had howled like a wild animal just moments before, had quieted down. Only the distant hum of the ship's engines and the soft crunch of boots against the dry earth could be heard as the group made their way back to the safety of the rancher's settlement. The Huntress stood tall, her eyes scanning the horizon as she adjusted her bow, the last remnants of battle still fresh in her mind. She had faced many opponents before, but these hired guns were different. They were ruthless, trained to take down anyone in their path. Yet, with the help of the rancher and his unexpected reinforcements, they had been driven off. The woman and man who had arrived in the ship were now walking beside her, their expressions unreadable but their presence undeniably reassuring. The man, tall and lean, had introduced himself simply as Cade. The woman, who had moved with a grace that reminded the Huntress of her own people, was named Tessa. Both had the quiet confidence of warriors who had been through battles far greater than this one. The rancher, who had introduced himself as Jack, walked beside the Huntress. There was a momentary silence between them, a kind of understanding settling in the air. They had fought together, but there was still much left unsaid. "Thanks for stepping in," the Huntress said after a long pause, her voice low but filled with gratitude. "I wasn't sure how much longer I could hold them off." Jack gave a small nod, his eyes scanning the rocky landscape. "No one deserves to be hunted like that. You're lucky I was around." The Huntress glanced at him, her sharp eyes catching his every move. "And you're lucky I didn't end up saving you instead."
Oh.
"You may be a good shot, but you weren't exactly prepared for that kind of fight." Jack chuckled softly, his smile wry. "Maybe not, but I've been around long enough to know when I've got no business sticking my nose in someone else's business. You made the right move, though. Could have easily taken me out if you wanted." The Huntress didn't reply, but a small smile tugged at the corner of her lips. She wasn't used to being saved, but something about Jack's calm demeanor, his willingness to stand by her, had shifted something inside her. It was a feeling she wasn't quite sure how to place. Tessa, who had been walking ahead, glanced over her shoulder, her eyes narrowing slightly. "You're right about that. Those men weren't just any bounty hunters. They've been chasing the Huntress for weeks now. If they came after her, it's likely there's a bigger threat behind them." Cade nodded. "We've been tracking them too." "There's a larger operation in play, one that's been destabilizing settlements like this for months. These mercenaries are just a small piece of the puzzle. The Huntress felt a chill run down her spine. She had been alone for so long that she had stopped thinking of the bigger picture. But now, with Tessa and Cade here, the stakes were clear. There was something much larger at play, and she had unwittingly become a part of it. "You're saying there's more coming?" Jack asked, his voice steady but with a hint of concern. "Much more. These mercenaries aren't working alone. There's an entire syndicate behind them, and they're making their move across the colonies. They've been taking over resource-rich planets, destabilizing them for profit. And now it looks like they've set their sights on this one." Cade added, "If we don't stop them, there won't be much left to save. That's why we need to work together. They know about the Huntress now, and they'll come after her with everything they've got." The Huntress felt a weight settle in her chest. She had always fought alone, relying on herself and her instincts to survive. Now she was being asked to trust others, to rely on people she barely knew. But there was something about them, something in their eyes, the way they spoke, that told her they weren't just after their own survival. They had a purpose, a mission. "I've been fighting these men for months," the Huntress said, her voice steady but tinged with a quiet sadness. "They've taken everything from me. My people, my home. I'll do whatever it takes to stop them, but I can't do it alone." Jack turned to her, his expression softening. "You won't be alone. We'll figure this out. We'll take them down together." As the group reached the rancher's homestead, the familiar sight of his modest settlement offered a brief sense of comfort. It was a far cry from the chaos of the battle they had just fought, but for the moment, it was a place of refuge. The simple homely structures, the smell of fresh hay and food wafting in the air, it felt like a different world entirely from the harsh, unforgiving terrain outside. Jack led them inside, offering a place to rest. The fire crackled in the hearth, and the warmth of the small cabin was a welcome change from the cold night air. The Huntress took a seat near the fire, her body still tense, alert, but also grateful for the warmth. Tessa and Cade took their place beside her, and Jack moved toward the table, preparing some food. He didn't say much, but the quiet hum of his actions spoke volumes. He was a man who understood the value of silence in moments like this. "So, what's the plan?" the Huntress asked, breaking the silence that had settled over them. Tessa looked at her, her gaze intense. "We need to track down their supply lines, their leaders. We know they're operating out of a base somewhere on the southern continent, but we don't have the full intel yet. We'll need to move quickly," Kadid added. "The longer we wait, the stronger they'll get. They've been gathering resources, and soon they'll have enough firepower to take down anyone who stands in their way." The rancher nodded, his face serious. "Then we don't have much time." The Huntress rose from her seat, her eyes meeting the others with determination. "Let's get to work. I didn't come all this way to let these men take what's left of my home. We'll find their base, and we'll shut it down. Together." The group gathered around the table, poring over maps and making plans. The Huntress, Jack, Tessa, and Cade, all different people, brought together by fate, united by a common goal. They knew the road ahead would be hard, filled with danger and uncertainty, but for the first time in a long while, the Huntress felt a spark of hope. The wind outside howled again, but within the walls of the small cabin, a sense of purpose began to take shape. They weren't alone anymore, and together they would face whatever came next. The days that followed were filled with planning, careful movements, and waiting. The group, Jack the rancher, the Huntress, a fierce warrior, Tessa and Cade, skilled fighters from the Huntress's tribe, had settled into a routine. They were preparing for what would be their most dangerous mission yet. The mercenaries who had come to Red Hollow were only a small part of a much larger operation, and they had to act quickly before the syndicate grew too powerful. The rancher's homestead, once a place of calm and simplicity, had turned into a base of operations. Maps were spread out across the wooden table, and a steady stream of plans were being drawn up by the group. The hum of quiet discussions and the occasional sound of weapons being cleaned or checked echoed through the cabin. It felt like the calm before a storm. Jack had never been in a battle like this before. Sure, he had been a rancher for most of his life, but he had always kept to himself, focused on his land, his animals, and the quiet life he had built. But now his quiet life had been shattered, and he had been pulled into something much larger than himself. Something he couldn't just walk away from. The Huntress could feel the weight of their situation. She had faced countless enemies, but this syndicate was different. They weren't just after her. They were after everything the people of Red Hollow had built, everything the settlers had fought for, and they were willing to burn it all down to get what they wanted. The group sat together around the table, studying the map. There was a small settlement on the southern edge of the planet, not far from the desert. It was there that the mercenaries had set up their base. From what Cade and Tessa had gathered, the Syndicate was using this base to launch their operations across the planet. They were well armed, well organized, and they had resources Jack and the Huntress didn't. But there was a plan. "We'll need to move quickly," Cadet said, his voice firm. "We've been tracking their movements for days. If we don't hit them soon, they'll be fortified beyond what we can handle." The Huntress nodded, her fingers tracing the map.
"We'll attack at night. The cover of darkness will give us an edge."
"We'll move in, disable their weapons and communications, and take out their leaders. That should cripple their operation." Tessa looked up from the map, her eyes sharp. "We're also going to need help. This isn't something we can do alone. The settlers around here won't be enough. We need to find more allies." Jack, who had been silent for a moment, leaned forward. "You think we can get more people? The settlers here aren't exactly fighters. They'll be lucky if they can handle a few raiders, let alone a full syndicate." "We have to try," Tessa replied. "If we don't, they'll keep moving forward, and we'll lose everything." The Huntress stood up, her expression determined. Then it settled. "We'll make the rounds, talk to the settlers, convince them to join us. They won't have a choice. If they don't help, they'll be left with nothing." Jack looked at her, his gaze thoughtful. "What if they don't want to fight?" "I've seen fear in their eyes. I'm not sure we can change that." The Huntress glanced out the small window, watching as the first stars began to appear in the sky. People fight when they have no other choice. It's the same everywhere. That night the group set out, their plan clear but full of uncertainty. They needed to gather a small army, or at least enough willing hands to stand with them when the time came. The settlers were scattered across the region, some living in small clusters near the outskirts of Red Hollow, others closer to the dangerous desert. The first settlement they visited was a quiet, peaceful place. The homes were small but well-maintained, the people living in simple harmony with the land. But as Jack and the others approached, they could feel the unease in the air. The people here were kind-hearted but hesitant. The appearance of strangers, especially those with weapons, was enough to put them on edge. The rancher stepped forward, his voice calm and reassuring. "We're not here to cause trouble," he said, his eyes scanning the group. "We need your help. There's a larger threat out there, and if we don't work together, we'll all fall." The leader of the settlement, an older man named Elias, stepped forward. He was tall and weathered, his face marked by years of hard living. He looked Jack up and down, sizing him up before speaking. "We've heard about the Syndicate," Elias said slowly. "We know they've been moving through the region, taking whatever they can get. But we're not warriors. We've got families to protect, fields to tend to. We've never fought like you." The Huntress, standing behind Jack, stepped forward. "This isn't about being a warrior," she said, her voice cutting through the air with quiet strength. "It's about survival. If you don't fight, if we don't stop them, they'll take everything from you. Everything you've worked for." The group fell silent, the weight of her words sinking in. Jack watched as the people exchanged looks, unsure of what to do. Fear was a powerful thing, and he could see it in their eyes. "We can't do this alone," Jack said, his voice gentle but firm. "But if we work together, we can stop them. We'll protect your homes, we'll protect our land." Elias looked out across the settlement, his face etched with concern. After a long pause, he turned back to the group. "All right. But we need to know we've got a chance. If we're risking everything, we need to make sure we can win." The Huntress nodded. "We'll fight smart. We'll hit them hard and fast, and we won't stop until they're defeated." Over the next few days, the group traveled to other settlements, spreading the word and gathering those willing to fight. Some were too afraid, unwilling to risk their families for a cause they didn't understand. But others, those who had nothing left to lose, joined them. They were small in number, but they had something the Syndicate didn't: the will to fight for their homes. When the day of the attack finally came, the air was heavy with anticipation. The group gathered under the cover of night, the plan in place. Tessa and Cade led the charge, while the Huntress and Jack stayed in the rear, ensuring the settlers followed through. They moved quickly, silently, like shadows in the night. The mercenary base was not far from the southern desert, and as they approached, the sound of distant engines and the faint glow of lights grew louder. The Syndicate was ready, but they weren't prepared for what was coming. The first wave of attackers led by Tessa and Cade engaged the guards at the perimeter of the base. The settlers, though inexperienced, fought with the desperation of people who had nothing left to lose. The Huntress moved quickly, guiding the group toward the heart of the Syndicate's operation. Jack and Elias stayed behind, offering support and directing the settlers. The battle was fierce, but the group was relentless, pushing the Syndicate forces back, step by step. By the time the sun began to rise, the battle was nearly won. The mercenaries had been driven from their positions, their supplies scattered and destroyed. The group had done it. Together they had struck a blow to the syndicate that would not be easily forgotten. As the dust settled, the Huntress stood at the edge of the battlefield, her eyes scanning the wreckage. The mercenaries had been defeated, but the war was far from over. There was still much to do, and the road ahead would be filled with danger. But for now, they had survived. And together, they would continue to fight.